In the ever-evolving world of technology, media is at the forefront of everybody's minds. It affects and influences most aspects of life, especially that of policing. This video will look at the impact of the media on policing in society today, focusing mainly on England and Wales, and whether it helps or hinders the police's duties. In order to answer these questions, we will look at four main points, beginning with the media's interpretations of the police, and the police's views of these interpretations. Next, we will look at how the public's opinions are affected by these interpretations. Thirdly, at the police's relationship with the media, and finally, whether the media is a help or a hindrance to the police overall. So, what do you think when I say police? Everyone has their own different interpretation, with most of their knowledge of crime and criminal justice coming from their own media consumption, whether it be fictional or factual. Where a person is from can greatly influence their view of the police. For example, let's talk about fictional shows. Say you're from the US. Your shows would probably go from very hard, gritty, and overly dramatic to very comedic and slapstick. Compare that to over the pond. If you're from the UK, although the drama is still there, the shows tend to be more down to earth and have a hint more realism behind them. But because they are British, instead of full-blown comedy, they tend to be more satirical in their views. But just think, not everything to do with the police is made up. People's interpretations can be affected by factual shows just as much as fictional. Whether coming from the US or the UK, true crime shows, crime documentaries, and even the news are great influences on people's views, showing real crimes and how the police actually do their jobs with just a touch of drama. If you haven't noticed yet, both fictional and factual shows have something in common: the drama. The media is very selective when it comes to the crimes it chooses to present to the public, and it shows in the media we consume. But what are the police actually like? If we take away the grit, the comedy, and the drama, what are we left with? Most people probably couldn't answer me, as they've never actually had contact with the police before. Well, nothing meaningful anyway. So who better to answer that question than the police themselves? When asked, police officers like to point out the inaccuracies, especially the dramatic ones in these types of shows. They understand that they are only in there in order to make the viewers more entertained. Because who really wants to watch a police officer completing all the paperwork that comes with arresting the bad guy? But one thing they dislike about these shows is the fact that they give way too much attention to the negative experiences and parts of the police. For example, let's talk about the show that everyone's talking about and watching at the moment, Line of Duty, which looks into the supposed corruption that lies within the police and the bent cops that come with it. Again, members and former members of the police enjoy pointing out the inconsistencies, but understand why they're there, with some even expressing their enjoyment of the show. But lots feel like programs like these make the police on a whole look like the bad guys in the eyes of the public. So, we've talked about their opinions and what they might think, but what does the public actually think of the police? And how much of these opinions are based off media interpretations versus their own personal experiences? In a large-scale study conducted in 2002, Londoners were asked about their knowledge of the police and how they believed they learned that knowledge. 80% of them believed that most of what they knew came from news media, which was 4 times more compared to their direct experiences with the police. But what about fictional sources? Surprisingly, 29% of those asked reported that they gained their knowledge from media fiction, which was 9% more than their direct interactions with the police overall. When talking about public opinions, I've tried to summarise them into 3 main points. Firstly, the public's opinions on how safe the police make them feel. Research from YouGov in 2014 found that many people felt that the police were effective when it came to responding to emergencies and crimes in their area, with their trust in the police overall remaining steady over the last few years. But going back to media influences, after the Stephen Lawrence murder, when asked, 1 in 3 people said that their trust was affected by reports of the crime. Another factor to look at is where the public think the police should hold their priorities and responsibilities, with most people believing that the police have the most responsibility to look after vulnerable groups in society, such as missing people and victims of domestic abuse and harassment, and that they should prioritise crimes such as child exploitation, violent crimes and terrorism. And finally, what they think of the police in their local area. When asked, most people believed that they were not being informed well enough about events and crimes happening around them, but agreed that when they were informed, they received most of their communications through social media, such as Twitter. Visibility was another important factor to the people asked, and they believed that it had decreased in recent years, but when it was there, it was great at deterring crime. But are media influences the only factors that can affect a person's opinion? Age, socioeconomic status, gender, and a person's ethnicity can all play a role in their view of the police. Research from the UK government suggests that a higher percentage of older people had more confidence in the police than younger people, and that members of black minority and ethnic groups, or BME for short, had more confidence in the police as they aged. When it comes to socioeconomic factors, white people overall had more confidence regardless of economic status compared to that of other ethnic groups. Overall, women had higher confidence in the police compared to that of men. And finally, in terms of ethnicity, members of BME groups had lower percentage of confidence, especially that of black Caribbeans. We're going to move on now from the public's opinion and talk about what the relationship between the police and media is actually like. The relationship between these two powers can be seen as, well, there isn't really another way I can say this. It's complicated. Well, that's a nice way to put it anyway. If I had to sum it up, I would call it a symbiotic relationship. They rely on and support each other and probably couldn't survive as well without the other. For example, if the police didn't have the media, the public wouldn't know what was going on in their area and would probably lose trust in the police. And vice versa. If the media didn't have the police, there would be no exciting crime stories, which would mean no one buying or reading their papers. Because we all know everyone loves a good crime story. Each party has to have trust in the other, that they have each other's best interests in mind, but as we all know, this isn't always the case. The police doesn't always give all the facts, and the media doesn't always portray the police in the best light, as we've seen. In general, there needs to be balance between the two. Ever since the Freedom of Information Act, the police and media have both had to become more responsible for what information they are sharing and producing. Each force now has their own policy when it comes to media, focusing mainly on how they deliver their information and what type of message they want to send to the people. However, between 2005 and 2010, over 300 investigations have taken place into inappropriate relationships and unauthorized disclosures of information. So there is still some work they need to do in order to keep this relationship and improve it for the future. And finally, is the media a help or hindrance to the police? To start with, the media can help the police by giving the public peace of mind on how the police are handling the situations and crimes around them. The police are changing with the times and are now creating their own source of media, social media. Whether it be Facebook, Twitter, or even Instagram, the police are trying to keep people up to date with their duties and crime, and overall trying to be more present in people's lives, even if it is their virtual ones. The media helps the police find information that they can't normally find out about on their own. They spread the word and appeal on behalf of the police, which in essence could help solve crime faster. The police uses the media to help keep the public safe from danger, advising them on what steps to take, where is safe, and how they can help in emergencies. And finally, the media helps the police to gain public trust. The media spreads information for the police and helps inform the public of how the police are going about their duties. It shows that the police are not trying to hide any information from them. However, there are some downsides to the media's involvement. Firstly, media interference can impact ongoing police investigations, because if the wrong piece of information is given to the public, it may lead to further problems. The media can also make way for police corruption, in terms of illegal disclosures of information. For example, police officers or officials trying to gain some extra money reveal sensitive information to media sources, which, as mentioned before, could influence investigations. Sometimes the media doesn't always give the right information in their reports and ends up misleading people and causing them even more problems, like what happened during the Hillsborough tragedy, where supporters were blamed for something that they did not do and which has left the Sun being shunned in Liverpool to this day. And finally, as we talked about, the media is a great influence on public opinion, and if they portray the police in a negative light, that is probably the way that most people will see them. So, what have we learned? At the end of the day, the media that is presented, whether real or not, is going to have some inaccuracies and hold a bit too much drama, but who are we to judge as long as it's entertaining? On the whole, a lot of people learn their views of the police from the media they consume. However, most understand that these representations should be taken with a grain of salt. We have found that the relationship between the two is complicated to say the least, but both understand they need some sort of relationship to function in today's society. And finally, that the media can be helpful, but it can also hinder. It all depends on how they treat each other. You know the saying, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. On the whole, the police are becoming more proactive, strategic and professional in their use and relationship with the media, and let's hope this continues to improve over time. So, thank you for listening to me ramble on about this topic. You have been a wonderful audience.